We welcome everybody to this, I call it a training class on critical race theory. And this class is focused for information for parents and community members. Elina will do a second class on October 21st, and that is really focused on school board trustees, candidates who are running for school board, and who need a different perspective on this, because it is just rampant in all these schools, this Marxist stuff. So we are the Silicon Valley Association of Republican Women, and we are on a mission to find people to run for school board, because once Elina is done, if you had no clue that what this Marxist theology is being taught in our schools, we need to have people on the school boards that will, gather with the parents and make changes to the curriculum. And so if you know anybody who's interested in learning more about running for school board, I didn't say running, I said learning more about running for school board or volunteering to help a candidate who is running for school board, please go to our website at SVARW, and there's a tab, a menu link that says running for school board. So there, an individual can put their name on a list to learn more, to be invited to the next informational meeting. So with that, I'm going to introduce Wendy Brukwinski, our first VP, and take it away, Wendy.
Thanks, Jan. I'm here to introduce Elina Kaplan. She's the president and co-founder of ACES, which is the Alliance for Constructive Ethnic Studies, which is a nonpartisan grassroots coalition working to remove political agendas from K through 12 ethnic studies and instead replace it with curricula that inspires respect, fights racism, and fosters balanced, constructive analysis in the area of ethnic studies. Elina's managed nonprofit organizations for over a decade. Most recently, she led the social services division of Mid-Penn Housing, one of California's largest affordable housing nonprofits, where she supervised the delivery of social services and cultural programming for a wide spectrum of low-income ethnic groups, from children through seniors. Before that, Elina served as Chief Program Officer at the Oshman Family Jewish Community Center. She served on over a dozen Jewish boards and committees, including Limud Bay Area, Jewish Day Schools, Bureau of Jewish Education, Jewish Family and Children's Services, Jewish Community Relations Council, and multiple Jewish Community Federation committees. Elina holds an MBA from Stanford and BS degrees in math and computer sciences from Duke, so she comes quite well educated. Prior to the nonprofit world, Elina worked in high tech, notably leading the team at Oracle that created the first graphical user interface to a database. We're very fortunate to have Elina with us tonight, as she's become quite famous. Later on in the program, I'll post in chat a great interview she had with Bill Hemmer on Fox News, interesting one for her, where she describes eerie similarities between what she learned as a child in the Soviet Union compared to what kids are learning in schools today here in America. And then I'll post another clip where Elina is earning her chops as a domestic terrorist, speaking out before the Orange County Board of Education on critical race theory. Bold, determined, brave. Please welcome Elina.
Wow, Wendy, that's quite an introduction. Now I got to make sure I live up to this. Thank you so much for that kind intro. And thank you both to Wendy and to Jan for having me to talk on this really, really important topic. I wanted to tell you, before we dive in, I wanted to tell you a little bit about how I got started in this. Also, it's kind of cool for me to see a couple of familiar faces in here. Hi, Larissa. So actually, I also wanted to let you know to please enter your questions into the chat, as I think Wendy or Jan mentioned, and keep in mind that we're not going to be able to get to everything today, but when whatever you feel like we didn't get to, please feel free to email us. And that will be both in the chat and we'll follow up. The format today is going to be, we'll go through a presentation, we'll go through the basic concepts, and then we'll open it up to Q&A. I have a feeling there will be lots and lots of questions, so we'll leave plenty of room for those. So let me start out telling you a little bit about how I got started in this. So I started receiving a whole bunch of emails from friends, from colleagues saying, you have to look at this stuff. And the emails were about ethnic studies. I'd never heard the word ethnic studies before, the term ethnic studies. And I started thinking, okay, what is the deal here? So I finally caved in to take a look. The reason I hadn't been is that the thing was 600 pages. So I finally took a look at what we were talking about, and then I couldn't stop reading and stayed up all night reading this. And I did a double take because it didn't make any sense to me that some of this was sounding familiar. Now, to back up for a moment, I immigrated from the former Soviet Union as a preteen. And as it turns out, by the time that I immigrated, the indoctrination of communism and Marxism had already begun. And so this is why this stuff was sounding familiar. So I ran it by a few trusted friends, my parents, some emigres that came over as adults. And sure enough, they all said, yep, this is deja vu. We've seen this stuff before. A couple of them, by the way, interestingly enough, said that they're very sorry, but they can't read it and they can't help me with it because it was too traumatic. Okay, so then the question is, what in the world is this stuff doing in a California ethnic studies curriculum? And that's where we're going to pick up. And so today we're going to focus on CRT, critical race theory and ethnic studies. That is broader than one might think, because although one might think, all right, we're talking about one semester, it can't be that big of a deal. But as it turns out, ethnic studies is called for being infused into every subject in every grade. So what we're talking about is really quite broad. We are focusing specifically on K through 12. So I'm going to share a screen for a moment. Hold on. Okay. There we go. All right. So the first question that one would ask is, what is ethnic studies? For those of us that hadn't been exposed to it before, what is this thing? Turns out there isn't an agreement on what it is. And there are two basic models, essentially. There is something that we call constructive ethnic studies, which is pretty much what you would expect. It's building bridges, it's building empathy, understanding, it's focusing on ethnic group contributions, teaching about different perspectives so that kids can kind of expand their horizons. It's everything that you and I would think, right, that sounds about right. And sure, we want to teach our kids this. It turns out there is another field called critical, and it's now going by the term liberated ethnic studies as well. And that field comes from academia. It comes from college campuses where it's been since the 1960s. The roots go back to the Third World Liberation Front. And that field on college campuses, as taught, emphasizes the oppressor-victim paradigm, meaning that there are two boxes. There's oppressors and there's victims, and the entire world is divided into these two boxes. There is a specific ideology that's behind it, and there's a movement to, quote, challenge imperialistic colonial hegemonic beliefs and practices. Now, the few of you on here that are immigrants from communist countries, this will sound very familiar. And this field emphasizes militant resistance as a means to social change. Now, what happened is that academics from this area, this brand, if you will, of ethnic studies, who call themselves scholar activists, which is an entirely, we could spend hours on that issue in and of itself, whether or not there should be such a thing as scholar activists, because many academics believe that activism is not the place. Activism does not have a place in academia where the focus is supposed to be on scholarship. But they, these folks who acknowledge themselves as scholar activists, that's what they call themselves, have for many, many years tried to push this discipline down into K through 12, into schools. And so the opportunity came up when we saw this bill called AB 2016, we'll get to that in a moment, that was going to develop an ethnic studies model curriculum to get this critical or liberated ethnic studies into schools. I will use the term critical and liberated interchangeably. CRT-based ethnic studies, critical ethnic studies, liberated ethnic studies, they all mean the same thing. And they're all talking about these features, these characteristics. One thing that I find really helpful are these images that really drive it home, for me at least. You could really get a sense of the difference between the two. So the first one, what we would think of as constructive ethnic studies, you see this tapestry, right? This tapestry of, you could think of as different cultures, different ethnicities. The second one, you see a pyramid with a guy on top with his fist in the air, and you can see that this is representing revolution, uprising, what have you. Very recently, I also came across one more image that I thought was fascinating, and this is the new cover of the foundational text of critical ethnic studies called Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And I had to do a double take on this as well, because as you can see, it's a rifle with a pencil. You can see the quote below there by Paulo Freire, who is the author of this Pedagogy of the Oppressed text and is basically the father of this field. The quote is, "The oppressors who oppress, exploit, and rape by virtue of their power cannot find it in this power the strength to liberate either the oppressed or themselves." Now remember, this is instructions for teachers of K through 12 education. So there was a bill that I alluded to called AB 2016. The objective of this bill was preparing pupils to be global citizens with an appreciation for the contributions of multiple cultures. I would venture a guess that there are not that many of you on this call that would object to this objective, so to speak. Seems like kind of mom and apple pie, as I sometimes call it, because that sounds like exactly what we need in this country. Have students come together, appreciate contributions, make them feel like they're part of the bigger world. All right, so somehow, and the how is also an entire webinar in and of itself, we came from this to this. The Critical Ethnic Studies Association aims to bring into conversation the ways that concerted efforts and collectivized resistance to US imperialism ground our approaches for dismantling the neo-colonial schooling apparatus. So take a look again. We went from preparing students to have appreciation for the contributions of multiple cultures to this. And this was the process of creating the ethnic studies model curriculum. The people that are behind this Critical Ethnic Studies Association and the people that are the drivers of this type of ethnic studies created the initial draft of the ethnic studies model curriculum. Again, how that happened is an entire area in and of itself. Since then, the California Department of Education has acknowledged that there were problems, big problems in the process, and that they have put presumably things in place to not have activists take over the building of curricula. But nevertheless, it was too late for this particular area. And supposedly, the intent was that the model curriculum would be rewritten. Since then, it actually has improved to a great degree. There are organizations like ours that worked very hard, page by page, literally poring over hundreds and hundreds of pages, making recommendations for what to remove, what to modify. It has come a long way. It is still fundamentally has the guiding principles of critical ethnic studies. But again, much improved. All right. So where's this all coming from? I mentioned the Third World Liberation Front, whose origins are actually homegrown in San Francisco State University. The Third World Liberation Front fought for including communities of color in higher education and accomplished a lot of positive things with respect to it. And they also argued that it's up to us to make the revolution, to break the system, to smash it, shatter it, and destroy it, as Brother Lenin said. This is from a speech in 1968. So we're grown-ups. We can hold two things at once, right? There were positive things that this organization did. There were a lot of negative things that came along with them. They also described capitalism as a form of power and oppression. And this comes across, by the way, in critical ethnic studies, where capitalism is explicitly, not implicitly, but explicitly put together on an equivalent scale with racism and white supremacy. The emphasis is on militant resistance and decolonization, and those have always been key topics, key parts of this particular dogma. So just to give you a sense, here are some guiding principles. I'll pause for a moment so you can read them, so I don't have to read them out to you. But these are the guiding principles that are taken right out of the Liberated Ethnic Studies curriculum. You can see the emphasis where the racism is listed together with white supremacy and capitalism. So we've got capitalism being equivalent to racism and white supremacy. We've got imperialist, colonial, hegemonic beliefs, and so on. I think this is probably a good time. Wendy and Jan had asked me to talk a little bit about the roots of where all this comes from. So I'll just mention a little bit right now, and then if people have an interest, we can talk a bit more about it during the Q&A. So the roots of critical race theory, CRT, absolutely go back to neo-Marxism. Karl Marx, of course, lived and wrote in the 1800s. If you want to get a little bit closer to the roots of CRT, you would look at the writings of Antonio Gramsci, who was the one of the founding members of Italy's Communist Party, and was actually the secretary of the Communist Party. His writings became very fundamental in his philosophy. He wrote in the early 1900s, became very fundamental to organizations like the Third World Liberation Front and to the concepts of critical race theory, CRT. So when you think about where is all this coming from, if you read some of the information, some of the materials by Antonio Gramsci, you will get a sense of how CRT and neo-Marxism are intertwined. And this is how we get a lot of what we are, of what we're seeing in critical ethnic studies. Let's take a look at a contrast. So here's a contrast. We just looked at critical ethnic studies guiding principles. Here's a curriculum that we would consider a constructive curriculum. It's just recently put out by an organization called FAIR, Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism. And it does teach about intolerance and racism, but you can see that that's not that's not the focus. B, it's not being made equivalent with things like capitalism. And C, that it talks about accomplishments, contributions. It emphasizes mutual understanding. It talks about the foundation of American institutions. So you can see that this is closer, right, to what we would think ethnic studies would do. This is closer to what we thought was going to happen with that model curriculum. So here's an example, just so you can look at them side by side. So while the critical liberated ethnic studies wants to critique empire and its relationship to white supremacy, racism, patriarchy, cis-heteropatriarchy, capitalism, ableism, anthropocentrism, and other forms of power and oppression at the intersections of our society, constructive ethnic studies, or FAIR's curriculum, teaches historical and contemporary racism while inspiring students to feel that their voices and actions count. And the curriculum emphasizes the dignity and worth of each person because of our common humanity. So you can see these key terms that are particularly important to them. One of the things that is super helpful to me when I look at a philosophy or the politics of a particular group is whom they hold up as their role models. Who do they see as the people to look up to? And that's why I find it super instructive to look at the role models that are listed in critical or liberated ethnic studies. So you've got a very, very partial list here, just a few examples. I'll give you a moment to look at those. Now, a good question that one might ask is, well, okay, so this is pretty alarming. We're putting in front of kids as role models people that were terrorists, people that were convicted of murder of a police officer, people that were responsible for bombings. Who's missing? So here are people that are missing that you would think, and indeed, we've asked members of different communities, of different ethnic communities, who they would expect would absolutely be listed as role models. So these are all ones that you would think. Many of them are probably familiar to you, if not all. None of these are listed as role models. But guess what else? Neither is Martin Luther King. Neither is John Lewis. In 154, what are called important historical figures among people of color, these two, Martin Luther King, John Lewis, also Thurgood Marshall, Barack Obama, Shirley Chisholm, none of these appear. In fact, civil rights leaders such as John Lewis and MLK are described as passive and docile in resource materials. As a result of this fact, Dr. Clarence Jones, who was a speechwriter and advisor to Dr. Martin Luther King, by the way, he was the original drafter of the I Have a Dream speech. He is alive and well today and took a look at the ESMC, at that first draft of the ESMC, and wrote a very heartfelt, heartbreaking, I would say, letter to the California Department of Education, to the State Board of Education, and to Governor Newsom about where this curriculum was going, and talking about the perversion of history that is being perpetrated. That letter is on our website, where you can go take a look at it, which I highly recommend because I think it's really, really instructive. All right, so what do we do with this? Now what? Well, we've got the Ethnic Studies Model Curriculum, as you know, we passed in March. As I said, it's significantly better. However, that is not the curriculum that is mandated. There is no such thing as mandating a particular curriculum. It's up to the districts, it's up to individual schools, individual districts to decide what they want to teach as their ethnic studies curriculum. And so out comes the Liberated Ethnic Studies curriculum, which is the only one that is currently being actively propagated to school districts, where they're going one by one and getting them to agree to adopt their curriculum. They're also offering their consulting services. They are a for-profit, and we're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars that they're raking in, quote unquote, by propagating this curriculum. Some of you may have heard of the bill EB 101, which is currently on Governor Newsom's desk. I think we are now 2 days away from knowing whether he's going to sign it or veto it. It did pass the California legislation, and this is going to be a graduation. The bill is about ethnic studies being a graduation requirement for high schools. If things continue as they are, then what it effectively means is, unless we change the current trajectory, we're going to end up with this liberated / critical ethnic studies model in most schools. I probably don't have to tell you why this is big. I have a feeling that this audience understands. So why is this liberated ethnic studies big? So one, of course, the graduation requirement is coming up. It's not just about high school. So the graduation requirement, okay, that's for high school. But K-8 is also beginning to implement this. And this is very common. This is not just a couple schools here and there. K-8 schools throughout the state, throughout the country, really, are beginning to implement ethnic studies. The intent, as you'll see in the model curriculum, is to pervade all of education. And you have instructions in the SMC that say that it should be integrated into all subjects. And there are, of course, national plans for ethnic studies based in California. California almost always drives curricula across the nation. And teachers' unions have already said that they are planning on basing their ethnic studies recommendations on what happens in California. And we're already seeing this play out. So this is already playing out in Massachusetts and New York and Minnesota and Florida. The list goes on and on. A couple things that I just wanted to share with you, a couple of specific examples, because I think this is helpful. This is leaders in their own words. So when you hear critical ethnic studies is this, CRT is this, it's not that, I highly recommend going back to the sources. Instead of having a conversation up here kind of in fuzzy, ambiguous terms, I highly recommend looking at the actual quotes. And we have those and looking at the primary sources. So for example, in a training where one of our folks attended in Santa Clara, the instructions by the leader that was driving this were that teachers need to show, and here he showed a diagram with circles surrounding the center, which was imperialism and colonialism. So teachers need to teach their children, teach their students this information. The center is imperialism, colonialism, and around it are racism, genocide, capitalism, religion, classicism. I think one other thing. This is the same person that admitted when somebody said, well, wait, that just sounds like Marxism. He admitted that yes, some people might be turned off by the underpinnings, the Marxist underpinnings, but insisted the teachers must be grounded in the correct politics. In the meantime, so you might wonder, what in the world does that mean to insert ethnic studies into all subjects? Well, let me give you an example. We've got an instruction, a text called A Pathway to Equitable Math Instruction. And this is an instruction manual for educators who were instructed to identify and challenge the ways math is used to uphold capitalist, imperialist, and racist views. It also explains that white supremacy shows up when teachers insist on the right answer, ask to show your work, and so on. Now, I will say that one was in the draft that came out and has propagated to many districts, and teachers have been trained on this. Since then, they removed a couple of those key sentences that are particularly telling. But you will find it if you look in the Seattle Ethnomathematics Framework, you will see the exact same information. Together with this Pathway to Equitable Math Instruction, which has not officially been adopted yet, we have the following event happening in the math framework that is currently going through the California Department of Education process, and it's in the hands of the Instructional Quality Commission. The framework is currently slated to remove all accelerated tracks and all advanced math up to 11th grade. How you're supposed to get into advanced math in 11th grade when you haven't been anywhere up until 11th grade is something that baffles me, but that's another point. Here's an example of the Seattle math framework that I was talking about. Power and oppression as defined by ethnic studies are the ways in which individuals and groups define mathematical knowledge so as to see Western mathematics as the only legitimate expression of mathematical identities and intelligence. And this is then used to disenfranchise people in communities of color. This is an adopted framework, unlike the stuff that's coming through California right now. So in California, the situation is currently this. Since I brought it up, I might as well tell you what the math situation is. Currently, there's a draft of the math framework. It is going through, as I mentioned, the California Department of Education and the IQC, Instructional Quality Commission. There has been an effort to make it a little bit more, shall we say, sane. And as a result of that effort, so there's good news and bad news here. The bad news, you already see that this is completely mind-boggling. The good news is, as a result of the advocacy, that's how that pathway to equitable math instruction has gotten a few modifications here and there. So we see that change is possible, it's slow, and it requires quite a bit of public pressure. But it does happen. All right. These characteristics of white supremacy culture show up elsewhere, but particularly in that draft. It talks about individualism, objectivity, and meritocracy as characteristics of white supremacy culture. Let's see how we're doing in time. It is 7:36. Okay, so we can talk a little bit about this stuff. So why is this happening? Because that's a question that I think comes up for everybody. How in the world could this be happening, and why is it happening? Much of it is under the radar. So the perfect example of this is the history of the ESMC. People with a very particular ideological agenda basically hijacked a bill that had the best of intentions and completely under the radar created a curriculum. Despite the fact, by the way, that there are constructive curricula out there and they could have chosen to go with those curricula, they created this curriculum pretty much while nobody was looking. The vast majority of parents and teachers don't know what is currently going on with respect to critical ethnic studies. By the time, with the ESMC, by the time it started becoming public, it became very, very hard to push back. The good news is that people did push back and there were changes. Oops, sorry about that. I silenced my phone. However, this is continuing with current ethnic studies, with current critical ethnic studies. I would venture a bet that the vast majority of parents and teachers still do not know what is going on. They have no idea of some of these examples that are in the classroom, some of which you can see by going to our website. And by the way, including people of color, of course, who once they find out what their kids are being taught and the fact that their kids are being placed in this victimhood bucket, are absolutely not interested in having their children learn that they have always been victims, they are victims, and they will always be victims. This is, I don't know how many of you saw this article in, I believe, The Atlantic. There was an article where a woman tells her story, a parent from Illinois, and tells her story of her 11-year-old child who had always wanted to be a lawyer, and comes home and tells her, "Mommy, I realized that I can't be a lawyer because it turns out that the whole system is stacked against me." And this is precisely the kind of thing that we're expecting kids to be learning within this paradigm. This is becoming less and less of an issue, but it is an issue when parents and teachers find out what is the result of this curriculum. What does it mean? Many are afraid to speak up. And this is where there's safety in numbers. And that is why it's super, super important that we build up a critical mass and that people go in together, that they find like-minded parents, they find like-minded neighbors and go in together when they go to board meetings, when they approach board members, when they approach superintendent or principal of a school. And momentum is absolutely starting to build to get to that critical mass. The other thing I'll say is the Orwellian doublespeak, that idea of using words that sound innocuous, but in reality mean something different, is another obstacle, if you will, to people understanding what's actually going on. So words like critical hope and radical healing sound positive, and even critical pedagogy, I think most people even today still assume that that refers to critical thinking. In reality, all of these terms have to do with the dismantling of a system. And unless somebody understands that as they're reading, it's hard for them to get what it is that the text or the lesson plan is getting at. We do have information on how to identify when something is a critical or liberated ethnic studies curriculum or curriculum in general. And we just have published our toolkit, which we'll put in the chat, and also you'll get as a follow-up, so look for an email from us. In the meantime, maybe Wendy or Jan could put it in the website, both our website and the toolkit. There is information there. And if people are interested, I'll actually, in the Q&A, we'll share, I'll open it up so that we can take a look and people can see what you can look for when you're looking at a curriculum, what keywords to look for, what general style to look for. And there's a contrast there for several things so you can see examples. All right. I'm not telling you to go suing schools or districts, although that is a path that some are choosing. However, we have found that a lot of parents, a lot of community members do find it helpful to be grounded in specific education codes, to be able to speak out at school board meetings and to say, hey, this material is breaking section 51,500 of the Ed Code, because teachers are not supposed to be sponsoring activity that promotes a discriminatory bias on the basis of race or ethnicity, religion, nationality, and so on. So we actually have this in our toolkit, what the Ed codes are and what they say, in case it is helpful and you are one of those people that find it grounding to be able to refer to specific Ed codes. Keep in mind that, so one would think, well, if those Ed codes exist, then what's the problem? How can we be having this situation? Keep in mind that the only way that these come into play is if somebody either brings them up and says, this material is breaking an Ed code, or actually sues, it actually prosecutes a school district or a school. So otherwise they're like trees in a forest that nobody has heard fall. But they are there for you as a resource. This is something that I just wanted to share that people probably have questions around, because there is a constant question around, is there CRT in K-12 or not? And we get conflicting answers. So this is fascinating. So on June 30th, the National Education Association, the NEA, which is the country's largest union, voted to approve a plan to promote CRT in all 50 states. And they specifically said, they approved the money for it. They specifically said that there's the funding for 3 separate items related to increasing the implementation of CRT in K-12. Specifically, the resolution also promised that it was studied, and again, see this language to start to look familiar, empire, white supremacy, note that that's lumped in together with capitalism, anthropocentrism, and anti-Blackness, and so on. July 8th, so 8 days after the NEA announced that they are funding specifically an increase in implementation, meaning it's already in schools, CRT is already in schools, but they're funding implementation. Randy Weingarten, who is the president of AFT, the second largest teachers union in the country, was quoted in an article as saying, and I believe on TV as well, as saying, let's be clear, critical race theory is not taught in elementary schools or high schools. So you've got these, you're going to hear these messages that are completely inconsistent with each other. Of course, CRT is absolutely being taught. Hundreds of schools throughout the country are doing exactly that. And an example from our own district, by the way, and this is just one that we happen to come across, the Hayward Unified School District actually issued a release, I think it was around July, also early July, talking about expanding their ethnic studies program through all grade levels, preschool through 12, and across all disciplines. Remember, this is what I was talking about, infusing it into everything. And that the policy and efforts to develop an ethnic studies framework are informed by and will include critical race theory and the liberated ethnic studies model curriculum. And by the way, they're hiring the folks from the liberated ethnic studies model curriculum to do this implementation. Now, all that said, I will tell you that ACES as an organization tends to not get involved in CRT or not CRT. And the reason is CRT has become such a political football, and it's become such a politicized issue that it's too easy to be dismissed as like, oh, you just, we get called white supremacists all the time, or just right-wing crazy. As it turns out, most of our organization actually is leans left and is quite liberal. Although we do, of course, have many conservatives and Republicans. And what we don't want is to get into this tug of war on CRT. So we generally tend to focus on liberated ethnic studies, critical ethnic studies, and not call out CRT. This is a strategic issue that we go back and forth on, and it changes as the times change and as people learn more and more about CRT. But I just wanted to share some of the thinking on our end about the strategy behind this. Okay, from our perspective, I just want to cycle back to what we think ethnic studies should do. Now, before I say this, I will say that there are many people that question whether or not ethnic studies should be a standalone class. And the argument goes, if indeed there's a problem with how we teach history or how we teach social studies, then let's fix that. And let's ensure that we teach those subjects in an all-encompassing way. And let's not add another subject. However, we don't get into that discussion because most schools are already sold on the idea of having an ethnic studies class, and that train has mostly left the station. So we focus on what should ethnic studies do. And from our perspective, you can absolutely have constructive ethnic studies that empower students to dream big, that builds mutual respect, builds understanding, empathy, all those things. Absolutely openly and honestly addresses racism. This is not about whitewashing history. This is not about addressing history honestly or not addressing history honestly. You can absolutely do so. You can talk about history honestly and talk about addressing racism without putting students and humans into boxes that are either victim or oppressor, and without pushing a particular ideology onto kids. Political perspectives have to do with that particular ideology, and that ethnic studies can be an opportunity to present a range of different perspectives. Okay, so a few words on what can you do. There are a lot of things you can do. And again, I encourage you to check the website, or if you just click on Take Action, you'll see a whole list of things that you can do right now. Reach out to your school board, to your superintendent about the ethnic studies curriculum. I know many of you, I strongly, strongly encourage you to run for school board positions. And many of you are considering that. That is one of the best things you can do to make a difference, because until we can usher in change from the school board's level, from people that are reasonable and understand what's going on, it's going to be very hard to make progress. So if you are able and willing to do so, we strongly encourage you to make a difference in that way. What you can do starting tomorrow is start getting to know your district's policies, ask questions, ask about how's the curriculum created, how's it approved, what's the community oversight, how are taxpayer dollars being spent for this curriculum, and which organizations are they hiring to help with the curriculum development and the teacher training, because that will be key. In many cases, you'll be able to look up those organizations and go, aha, I know where this is headed. And in other cases, you can reach out to us and we'll tell you. Okay, we have this toolkit that hopefully will help people, as I mentioned, get started on both for themselves or on organizing others together with them. There is absolutely safety in numbers, as I mentioned, and it would be great if people can start reaching out to boards, to superintendents, to their principals, even as small groups. It doesn't have to be a group of 20, it can be a group of 3, but just as a start. You can write letters to the editor, to local papers. The name of the game is shining a big giant light on what's happening. So I think of it as a dual strategy of expose and mobilize. So expose what's happening, shine a big giant light on it, and mobilize people around it if you can. Everybody has a role to play. So if you're not into mobilizing grassroots people, it's fine. Use whatever skills you've got, whether to do your own research and to reach out one-on-one to different schools and school districts, to write letters to the editor, to expose this, get the information out there. Attend school board meetings so that you can stay informed on what is happening. We talked about getting on a school board or, by the way, a district curriculum committee. So it doesn't have to be a board. There are also committees that you can get yourself onto. And talk to other parents and teachers to spread the word. Again, name of the game is shine a light. So the more people you talk to, the more people you can expose to this, the better it is for making a change. Okay, I think I am now going to pause and let's take some questions. And if people are interested, I will navigate to the toolkit and depending on people's interest, show you what is there and what can be useful. So I'm going to stop sharing. And those of you that are willing to put your beautiful faces up on screen, I would love it. So I can feel like I'm not talking to just a screen, but I totally understand if you don't want to do that. And I will get started answering questions. So Jan or Wendy, what have we got?
We have a bunch of questions here.
I thought so.
Okay, Carl wants to know, given that the roots of this occurred over 3/4 of a century ago, what chance do we have of adjusting the thinking in the short term? And what foundational changes do we make for the long term?
Okay, so that's a big philosophical question. I think that we don't have a choice but to succeed. So let's start with that. Failure is just not an option in my mind. I believe that we're going to succeed in this. I believe that we're going to do it by exposing it to the most people possible. That is premised on the idea that the vast majority of Californians and the vast majority of Americans do not want this philosophy and these principles in schools, and they don't believe in them themselves. So let's start with that as a principle. If you believe that, and I firmly do, then if you inform enough people about it and you encourage enough people to go out and inform others and you get them speaking up, then I absolutely believe that this is not only a short-term change, but it's also a long-term change. Now, in answer to your question of, since this goes way back when, sure, that's true. Karl Marx and Gramsci go all way back when, except that despite that, we do have a free market society. We have a democratic society. So we have democratic free market societies all over the world, despite the fact that these philosophies have been around for not only decades, but centuries. So let's see, the century, over a century, let's say. So I absolutely think that we not only have hope of reining this in and changing the trajectory of how things are going, but that we have no choice but to do so.
Jan, did you have a question?
Yeah, let me, well, Frederica wanted what was the website address, but we have put that in the chat twice. So I think you can find that. And also, we're going to give Elina the list of everybody who signed up for this this class, and she's going to mail information to you. And then if you have some other questions or whatever, you'll be able to directly email with her and get your questions answered. Now, Neil's asking if if you would email the PowerPoint slides that you displayed, and could they use them when they discuss the critical race theory issue in a different conversation?
Yes, absolutely. I just see a logistical thing here. It says cannot start video as host stopped. Not sure what that means, but give me a second to get, unless Jan or Wendy, you know what to do.
What are you saying?
It was Charlotte. Charlotte, are you okay now?
No, Carl mentioned that nobody can start video. So let me just get tech support. Stand by for one moment.
This would be your husband. Must be nice having an IT department.
Yeah, exactly. It's very nice. Personal tech support. Apparently nobody can. I'm going to mute myself for a second while I figure it.
There is so much to this. It's interesting and scary.
They should be able just to click on their little.
Okay, folks, try again. Somebody must have accidentally turned off video. There we go. Awesome. Okay, now we can see your beautiful faces. Thank you, thank you, thank you. For some reason, video must have been off. Okay, ready for the next question.
Well,
go ahead, Jen.
And I think they want to know, how can we find out if the school is teaching critical race theory? I think that's the big question. And you probably covered part of that, but you want to amplify that?
Yeah, okay, so first, just to, I think I answered the other question, but just to say again, yes, you can absolutely get the PowerPoint slides. Happy to share that. If you are interested to be able to share something with the district, let us know and we'll also customize them for you based on, so feel free to reach out and say, here's the situation, because it really depends. If somebody is already off the deep end and they're sold on critical race theory based ethnic studies or critical ethnic studies, or somebody's not really sure, or they're already on your side and they don't know, they need the tools to be on your side more. So we can help you figure out what is it that you're dealing with and customize it to your needs. Charlotte still can't start video. I'm sorry, Charlotte. I'm not sure how to help you. We'll just imagine you. The other question, Jan, I think you were saying, how can people tell if it is being taught in schools? So partly there's information in the toolkit that you can take a look at, and it has information of what you would have to actually ask to see the information. So partly this comes from building relationships, having meetings. It's you can absolutely ask to see the principal of the school, ask to see a superintendent of the district, and say that you're interested in seeing the curriculum for ethnic studies. So you are absolutely entitled to see that curriculum. You're entitled to see the outline, whatever form of it they have. And you can insist that they share this with you. That is absolutely your right. If you have problems, please let us know and we will walk you through it. And we'll work with you to make sure you get your hands on that material. And then once you have it in your hands, you can take a look at the document that I was telling you about that shows you how can you tell if something is a liberator critical ethnic studies.
Now, this is a topic we had for the next session too, I believe, is going more in depth about how to define what you're looking at, whatnot.
That's right. Thank you for mentioning that, Wendy. So at the next session, we're actually going to do something different. We're going to be very hands-on. We're going to go through some case studies. We're going to go bit by bit and actually talk about how do you use the toolkit, which parts of it do you use when, and how do you get started, all of those things.
That'll be good. Now, Alan wanted to know, back a few charts you'd mentioned about training leaders, and he wants to know who the Northern California training leader would be, if that person's identified.
Reach out to us on email and we'll tell you who that particular person was.
Okay. All right.
Okay. Ha is asking, how can I get involved in the critical mass to show a concern for critical race theory?
Sure. So again, I think part of that is going to be covered in our next meeting. We're going to talk through hands-on, what do you do? In the meantime, I would encourage you to go check out the toolkit. If you want to get started before then, that would be great. And it walks you through, find a couple of friends or neighbors or somebody, and then do this, and then do that, depending on what your interests are. The other thing that I encourage you to do is I'll include the link to our volunteer form. I will send you that so that you can go fill out the form, or it's a contact us form. And we'll be able to match you with other people in the district. So that way you'll be able to say, hey, I'm interested in getting involved. Who else have you got? So we'll be able to start matching you with others. And that makes a difference as well.
That'll be good. Now, Patty was talking about teachers in her district were kind of upset about the distance learning. Were a lot of the teachers busted in terms of what they were teaching with CRT last year?
That's such a great question. I think that this was part of a turning point for us, because this is one thing that worked in our favor. All of a sudden, parents started seeing, wait, what is that that's up on screen? What is that slide? Mm-hmm. Which was interesting. It was an interesting turn of events. And in fact, at one of these teacher trainings, one of the teachers raised her hand and said, well, I just want to tell everybody that we have to be careful nowadays that school is virtual, because parents can see what we're teaching and they can misinterpret it. So there's even an awareness that this is happening.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I see shaking heads. It is pretty mind-boggling to have, at a teacher training, somebody say, watch out, parents can see what you're teaching.
It's interesting how our eyes have been open to a bunch of stuff this past year and a half.
Absolutely. I see a question about how to check out the toolkit. So I'm going to do two things. If you go to our website, calfstudies.org, and you navigate to, this is one easy way, navigate to resources, you can go to volunteer toolkit, and that's easier than, because we also gave you the link, but this might be easier. So here's one way. Oh, that ended up going to just Robert. So let me get that to everybody. Okay, so that's one way. Because the talking points, which are possibly the most important part of this, are behind a firewall, we're still figuring out whether or not we want to open it up for everybody to get, because one of the problems is they have scripts and they have exact talking points. So we're a little concerned about all of that, all of the moles and spies getting their hands on that. There's nothing particularly secretive there, but it makes it easier to formulate your responses. So on the other hand, we want to get it to the most people possible. So right now we're still figuring out how to give people access to it. For you guys, you don't need to go through the step of filling out the form. I'm just going to send you the link to it, and you'll be able to access it without going filling out the form. So it is tiny URL, ACES toolkit. Don't worry if you aren't going to remember this or aren't going to put this, enter this somewhere, because this is all going to be in the follow-up email. So the one thing I would say is please check your spam, because a lot of the emails will go into spam. So please be sure to check your spam, and because all this information will be in there. ACES Toolkit talking points. There you go. If you navigate there, it'll take you right to the talking points, and that's in addition to the regular toolkit. Okay, I'm just seeing something on the screen was displayed a link similar to Can you please put it up again on this website on the chat? That was just the Lausd studies. Here, we'll keep doing it. It was just www.caluststudies.org. Back to you, Jan. What else have we got?
Okay, Rich wants to know, so a parent complains to the teacher or school board and gets only a response: we don't teach critical race theory. Parents need to be enabled with a set of principles to demand which counter critical race theory disguised content. So I guess the question is, where is the material for parents to describe what a good ethnic studies is,
yeah,
and therefore demand their child not be taught that they are a victim based on skin color?
Yeah, so this is a good time, actually, I think, to navigate to what I was talking about, to the toolkit, and we'll do a preview. Again, keep in mind, we're going to go in a lot more depth into this at the next meeting. I do want to touch on one thing. This is precisely the reason that strategically we choose not to talk about CRT, because then you constantly get the, oh no, we're not teaching CRT. And CRT, so on the one hand, you've got CRT is just teaching history, honestly, and CRT is just talking about racism. So what's wrong with that? And then on the other hand, we get we're not teaching CRT. So you have to ask, okay, well, which is it? In either case, what is easier is exactly what this person said, which is having specific principles that you can look at and words and say, well, that's interesting. Look at these words. Those are precisely the words of a critical ethnic studies curriculum. And by the way, it's not like they're hiding it. They call themselves critical ethnic studies. They call themselves liberated ethnic studies. So you're not making things up. This is completely openly there. In terms of the other curricula, those are actually in the talking points. And there's a contrast chart that shows the difference between two types of curricula. So I was going to navigate to it, but I think I want to get through some other questions first, because since we're going to be going through it in the second session, which I encourage all of you to attend, I want to make sure I get through all the other questions, and then I'll go open up that toolkit. What else have we got?
Dorit was saying that it's not necessarily the best strategy to mention CRT, but the parent group that she's in wants to focus on Marxism and critical theory. Is it better to mention that? Do you want to mention Marxism when you're talking about this?
Yeah. Hi, Dorit. Good to hear from you. So yes, for me, that works, but it only works if you back it up with specifics. So talking about it in general terms doesn't do anything. It only works if you can follow it up immediately with, for example, here are 3 role models that were mentioned in the curriculum, that were mentioned in this lesson. It's interesting because these 3 out of the 5 that you talked about are all Marxists. And most of the time, this isn't hidden. You don't have to go digging to prove that they're Marxists. They're generally, if you go on Wikipedia, you'll see that this person is openly a Marxist or a neo-Marxist. So yes, I think that does work. Now, very shortly, I'm sure Marxism is going to become politicized as well, and we're going to keep changing our strategy. We're going to keep changing our messaging. But for now, yes, my preference is to go with Marxism and critical theory more than CRT, just because CRT has become a trigger word. But again, it really depends on each individual on what they feel resonates for them.
Mm-hmm.
There's a question that says, is teaching of critical race theory in our schools constitutional?
So that will be litigated in the courts it is already being litigated, and it will be litigated for a long time to come. This is not an overnight question. It's not like I can tell you, oh yes, because if that were true, then we would be done with it by now. So is it constitutional? I would guess that it's a gray area. I don't think it's an easy answer to give. And I think people are going to keep litigating it for a long time. And nevertheless, we have to move forward regardless of whether or not it's constitutional. So there are some people that are bringing it to court. So for example, some of you may know of a case right now in Nevada where a mom is suing a school because her biracial child was required to assert his white dominance. And so she's suing the school. But those cases are not that many right now. This is an example of how we're going to find out if it's constitutional or not, but it's going to keep going for a while.
You know, something we haven't talked about here this is my question actually. Now that the Attorney General is sicking the FBI on parents who go up against school boards, which is, you know, I'm joking about you being a domestic terrorist, but seriously, they're heading that way. What do you guys see happening, and how are we going to counter that?
So there are definitely national efforts afoot to put a stop to that. I am hopeful that it's not actually going to impact us. I'm hopeful that it's not actually going to be implemented. At this point, I'm happy to say that nobody has been impacted by it whatsoever. And I don't expect them to be. And honestly, like I said before, we haven't got a choice. I mean, we have to stand up. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that so what's happening right now with that memo is an annoyance, and I am hopeful that it will go away.
So you think it's just intimidation at this point?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, good. Jan, back to you.
Okay, well, Bonnie asked if the slides, when printed out, have your notes attached to them.
No, they don't. I'm sorry. We can, if there's enough interest, then we can create something like that. We can create slides with notes. I guess it depends on what the purpose would be. Bonnie, you want to unmute yourself and tell us, are you thinking just for your own educational purposes, or are you thinking so that you can give the PowerPoint yourself just to get a sense?
If it can you hear me?
Yeah.
Helped to reinforce my own knowledge of what was being said, because it was great, but also I could print it with notes as a handout to parents, because I think it's a good overview, and with notes, it might absorb into them without reading a big full document. The notes.
Yeah, okay.
PowerPoint.
Got it, thank you. So we are constantly updating different materials, and we're constantly trying to figure out what is most useful to people. I would be curious if people could take a look at what we have on our website. I think that there are materials that are actually even more helpful than, because a PowerPoint usually goes with a person, and it's easier when the person can speak through it. But there are also lots of materials that we have, both on the toolkit and on the website at large, that you may find are just as good or better. If it turns out that no, you'd really like to have it in the form of PowerPoints, then we'll work on that as well.
I'm interested in getting something that's short and sweet and to the point to give to teachers, to people, to get their interest in this period, and then lead them to your website for great detail. But we got to get them, in quick emails and spread the word.
Yeah, so there's a one pager, for example. There's different, we've got different levels. There's like a one pager, there's a longer piece, there's a small chart. So take a look and see what you think.
Sounds like it's all there. Good, thank you. Thank you.
Jan, shall we take a look at the toolkit, or do we have a lot more?
Oh, there's Rudy has a question, and I've asked Rudy to unmute and just ask this question because I don't think I could do it justice.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Excellent presentation. Elina, I'm a big fan of Instagram on social media. I'm 53, but I I swim on Instagram for a lot of news and information. And I was reviewing your website and the link to Instagram, and I noticed that there hasn't been a post on your Instagram account since March. But what's most concerning to me, and if maybe you could speak to it, the accounts that you follow seem to be very left-leaning and very partisan. I was just curious, is that a political strategy in terms of?
Yeah, great questions. Awesome
Thank
questions.
you.
Okay, so Instagram, we go back and forth on it about how important it is to do it. It's all about bandwidth and trying to figure out where we put our efforts in. For a while, as you can see, we had an Instagram presence, and then we kind of paused it. I would be curious, please do reach out and give your thoughts. I would definitely be curious to hear your thoughts about if you think that, yes, it is important. We always welcome people's opinions on this. So you're right, there hasn't been a presence on there, and we can look at it again, whether or not we should be. In terms of following the different organizations that lean left, you are absolutely right. It is a strategic decision. We are consistently lumped as crazy right-wingers, and it is, we are ourselves entirely nonpartisan, as I mentioned at the beginning. However, I have to say that the issues, which I strongly believe should have absolutely nothing to do with left-wing or right-wing. I can't think of an issue that's more non-left-wing, right-wing. It's just about indoctrination at schools. Why would I would stand up and say that I don't want kids indoctrinated into any other philosophy either. But that said, people that lean right and that are more conservative tend to get this more intuitively, and they tend to get it faster. And as a result of that, and people that are on the left tend to need, I'm totally generalizing right now, so I hope nobody gets offended. People that are on the left tend to need more information and a lot more explanation and a lot more going back and forth and back and forth. So it is not surprising that people think of us as a right-wing conservative organization. And so, yes, you're absolutely right. From a strategic perspective, it's important to us to show that, no, we also support left-leaning organizations. It's strategic, yes. On the other hand, it's 100% genuine. So we wouldn't put anybody on there that we don't actually support. So I just want to be clear that while it's strategic, it's also completely genuine. But that's the reason. I hope that addresses it. I completely understand why you would ask the question. I saw one that I wanted to highlight. I saw one from Rich. And that makes me think, if anybody has input, like Rich does, thank you, on talking points, scripts, whatever, we welcome it. Please email us. This is brand new. We just released it yesterday, and we definitely want to hear from people on what they're finding useful, what they're finding not useful, and what they would like to see slightly different. So you can literally copy those things into Word and mark up where you feel like you could use more information or different wording, or as Rich said, he'd rather make them more direct statements than question marks, whatever it is. We would love to hear from you. I see you mentioned there's a one-pager describing. Okay, why don't we go navigate to the toolkit now? It's 8:18, so we got a little bit of time left, but we can navigate and take a look, because there are lots of questions that are coming up about different pieces that are in it. Alex asked if it makes sense for people to spread it on social networks. Please, please do. Absolutely. As I mentioned, name of the game is spread the word, shine a light. This stuff is happening and we need people to know about it. So absolutely share anything and everything that you can. And if you don't see something in the toolkit, if you don't see something short, something that you feel like you would want to share, please let us know. All right, so here is what we're gonna do. I think I'm going to navigate to, I'm gonna share the screen and navigate to our website. Let's see if this works.
While you're looking for that, Ty Greaves has put in some questions that people could pose to school board members. And I just wanted to let you guys all know that Larry Pegram, who's one of the founders of the Values Advocacy Council, VAC as we call it, is putting together another organization. Jan, does it yet have a name?
Or, well, maybe Larry's on here and he could, oh, it is called Inform Parents of Silicon Valley.
And what he's planning to do with that organization is to vet school board candidates to find out where they are in terms of critical race theory.
Well, and also what Larry's going to do is produce a video that shows how how curriculum is developed, right? And be able to get groups of parents together to start working together in particular school districts, I believe. And if that's not correct, Larry can.
All right, folks, tell me.
We're seeing your desktop at the moment.
Desktop. Okay, so let's do this. So you'll just see my eyes going over to a different screen periodically. Okay, so this is what the toolkit looks like, and you can see that there are different tips and resources. There's a guide to action. So for instance, somebody just asked about some kind of information on CRT, something that's quick. So here's one that is a chart, we call it contrast at a glance, that shows you the difference between constructive ethnic studies and critical / liberated ethnic studies. And so you can just see what the different contrasts are. Now, in general, it's not all that helpful without specific examples, but it helps for people just to get an idea. So that's one example. And that one, I just went to contrast at a glance. Here's another document that I was talking about, how to tell if it's liberated. And this one is more in depth and goes through different key words that you can pick up on. And you can literally search for these words, right? You can see words having to do with imperialism and colonialism. You can see neo-Marxist code words. One example that I find useful is the difference between guiding principles. So this one we went through and kind of underlined the key. It's a little bit, it's similar to what you saw before, but here is LAUSD, Los Angeles Unified School District's principle. This is the largest school district in California, contrasting it with the critical ethnic studies principles. This one is actually one of my favorites, that connect ourselves to past and contemporary resistance movements that struggle for social justice on the global and local levels to ensure a truer democracy. A truer democracy, note, not a more perfect union or anything else that could be said. Interestingly enough, a truer democracy is a Marxist term, and it stands for the abolition of private property. So there it is, right in there, in the guiding principle. So when somebody says, what Marxism? You can point to that, and if they say, no, it doesn't stand for that, you can show them some materials that say that, yep, it does. That one is really easy. Actually, I'm thinking maybe we should link it to something, but that one you can just Google truer democracy and Marx, and it comes right up. Another contrast is the one above. This is one that I was talking about earlier in the presentation. So this just puts it at your fingertips so that you can have an idea of what you can point to. So when somebody says, I don't know what you're talking about, you can actually put this in front of them and show them keywords. And you'll probably be basing it on your individual curricula, your specific curricula, but at least it gives you something to contrast it to say, well, you don't have to put it that way. You could put it this way, and you can absolutely, this isn't about not addressing history honestly. This isn't about not talking about racism. You can do all those things without indoctrinating students into neo-Marxism or putting them into boxes. Let's see, what's another one to share with you? How about an overview of liberated ethnic or critical ethnic studies. So here's a one-pager. When we talk about, I think it was Bonnie that was asking about the PowerPoint. So see if this is helpful. That it's kind of in a format that might be more easier for people to process if you're emailing them. And you could just email them the link, which also is helpful. And it goes through and talks about what is liberated ethnic studies, and actually gives you quotes so that you can, which is really helpful, so you can actually point to examples. There's also, if you go to the website itself, I find this one pretty useful, the FAQ. You can go through some of these. We're also putting up shortly a list of all we took it down temporarily. For those of you who saw the role models, we had a long list of Marxist and militant violent role models. We took it down temporarily because we wanted to add some, and it'll be back up within hopefully days. So you'll see that under resources as well. Talking points, just to show you what that looks like. Oh, no, I can't do that there. Hold on, I have to. So if you click on it directly from the toolkit, you'll get this form. But if you go to it directly, I'm typing it now. ACES Toolkit talking points. You should be able to navigate to it. And again, we're still trying to figure out. Nope, not that easily done. Okay, hold on, give me a second and I'll navigate right to our drive so that you can see. I just want you to get a sense of what's in there. It does have a lot of scripts, which makes it look long. It's not as scary as it seems because you don't have to be looking to all the scripts. The scripts are specifically for when you want to go to a board meeting or when you want to organize volunteers. All right, let's open this up. So this is what you'll see when you use that link that I gave you. It goes through different categories. So you'll see the different types of ethnic studies, divides students, indoctrinates a specific agenda, and so on and so forth. So this is a good thing to use if you'd like to go a little bit deeper to get a sense of what talking points to use. And this has examples and things like that. And if you're at the point where you're going to a board meeting and you want to organize some people, there's sample scripts. It just makes it a little bit easier, more efficient. Okay, we are at 8:26. So, and I promised that we would end on time, and Jan and or Wendy might have something to say. So I am going to wrap up. And I just wanted to thank you for being here and for your time on this super important issue. And I want to share with you that the reason that I'm doing this work is that I really believe that what we're doing here is nothing short of deciding how the next generation of Americans will interact with each other. I do believe that ethnic studies has the opportunity to build bridges, to bring students and groups together, but not if it puts them into boxes and pits them against each other. And we need literally each and every one of you to get involved in every way you can. Again, run for school board if you at all can. Organize, mobilize, go to school board meetings, do everything you can. We need each of you to get involved in any way that you possibly can. Otherwise, we all fail. And we just can't afford to because the stakes are too high. Thank you very much for joining us.
And thank you so much, Elina, for leading the charge on this.
Oh, yeah.
Pleasure.
We totally appreciate it. And hopefully there's some people that were listening that may be more motivated to either run for school board or help find somebody to run. And make sure that you sign up for the October 21st class to continue on with this. And that's on our website, and we'll be sending information out. So thank you so much.